The macroscopic structure of the kidney is the structure that you can see with your naked eye. So macroscopic means you don't need a microscope to see it. So if we cut a kidney down the middle, we'll see this cross-section type picture. The first important things to notice are the renal artery and the renal vein. The renal artery will often have an arrow that is going into the kidney like that, which shows blood is flowing into the kidney, whereas the renal vein will have an arrow showing blood coming out. But normally, if it is a correct diagram, the renal artery is above the renal vein, so A before V. Now, the renal artery is bringing oxygenated blood, but it is impure blood, so it will contain nitrogenous waste and excess salts and excess water, that kind of thing, into the kidney to be filtered, and then the renal vein removes the blood from the kidney. So it is now deoxygenated, as all of the cells in the kidney use that oxygen, but it is the purest blood that exists. It has no nitrogenous waste in it. This structure that is showing you here like a kidney bean, just this little area where the renal artery and renal vein enters the hilum. And if we actually look at the kidney structure, I've drawn a blue line here across the top of these pyramids. So these are all pyramids. They have a striped appearance because of the loops of Henle, the ducts of Bellini, and collecting ducts. So they make it look stripy. At the top of the pyramids, we draw this line. So anything in this area here below the line is part of the medulla of the kidney. So that's the medulla. Anything outside the blue line between the top of the pyramids and the renal capsule, which is the membrane that surrounds the kidney, this area here is called the cortex. So we've got the renal capsule wrapping around the kidney, just the membrane. The cortex is between the pyramids and the capsule, and then the medulla is below the top of the pyramids going inwards. Then you get these little areas here which collect the urine, and the ducts of Bellini or collecting ducts will empty their urine contents into there. These areas here that are leading away from the papillae, that's a papilla, this black line here. This is a calyx. You get big calyces and small calyces, plural of calyx. But the big label that I want you to be aware of is this area here, the pale yellow area is the renal pelvis. So that is the area where all the calyces collect and empty their contents. Then that means that the renal pelvis sends that urine down into the ureter, which enters the bladder. The bladder will be down here somewhere. And the job of the ureter is to carry urine into the bladder. We're going to focus a bit more on the microscopic structure of the kidney. So we're going to zoom in on one of these areas over here to look at what gives the pyramid the striped appearance. And the microscopic kidney structure looks at structures called nephrons. So this is a diagram of a nephron. It's quite a spread out nephron. Sometimes we'll add blood vessels that are wrapped around the tubules, but there's some very important labels for this functional unit of the kidney. So the nephron is the smallest part of the kidney that can function on its own. You have 1 million nephrons in each kidney, and they each do the same job. So that's how someone can survive only having one kidney. So the nephron is made up of two major parts. The first part is the renal corpuscle, which is shown by bracket number 1, and the second part is the renal tubule. The renal corpuscle can also sometimes be called the Malpighian body, but I find it easier to keep the terms more simple. So the renal corpuscle also has two parts. The first part is this capillary network which enters here, and that is called the glomerulus. So the glomerulus is just the capillary network that is found inside this cup-shaped Bowman's capsule. So this blue cup that wraps around the glomerulus is the Bowman's capsule. Now you get two blood vessels that are importantly associated with the glomerulus, and those are the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole. So the wide afferent arteriole, it's important to note that it is wide, arrives at the glomerulus. So the way you remember it is the afferent arteriole arrives at the glomerulus or at the Bowman's capsule, whereas the narrow efferent exits the glomerulus or the Bowman's capsule. So it's important that the one is wide and the other one is narrow because it builds up a hydrostatic pressure, almost like a bottleneck effect. A lot of blood is able to come in. This is off a branch of the renal artery, and very little blood is able to leave. So it makes all the blood in here almost back up, which makes the process of glomerular filtration take place. So the next part of the nephron is the renal tubule. So the renal tubule is this entire tube that goes from the Bowman's capsule all the way to the end of the nephron, which meets and ends in a collecting duct. So these long, straighter tubes are collecting ducts, and many nephrons will share one collecting duct. So the renal tubule has three parts. It has the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal means close. So this is the first convoluted tubule. It's all windy, so it's convoluted. Then it also has the distal convoluted tubule. So the distal convoluted tubule is after this loop-de-loop over here. And this loop-de-loop is called the loop of Henle. So the loop of Henle has three parts. It's got the descending limb, because urine will be moving down. It's got the hairpin bend, and it's got the ascending limb. So the ascending limb carries the urine up towards the distal convoluted tubule. So the direction of flow in this structure is always going to be going this way, and then it'll be there, and down the loop of Henle in the descending limb, turn at the hairpin bend, up through the ascending limb, through the distal convoluted tubule, and eventually into the collecting duct and into the renal pelvis, into the ureter, and into the bladder. So it's vital that you understand the structure of the nephron before you do the processes such as glomerular filtration, which occurs over here at the glomerulus, tubular reabsorption, which occurs all the way along this area here, where we reabsorb the useful substances like glucose, sometimes water, salts, etc., and then tubular secretion or excretion, where certain molecules are pumped into the tubule depending on what is needed by the body. For example, that happens when we need to maintain pH of the blood. So before learning the processes that occur in the nephron, you need to know all of these labels and then the more detailed labels for each of the parts where necessary. But a lot of the processes that occur in the nephron are very much related to a part of the nephron being structurally suited for its function. So before you learn function, you have to learn structure.